The ACC runner-ups, the SMU Mustangs, standing at 11-2, are traveling to the Big Ten runner-ups, the Penn State Nittany Lions, who also stand at 11-2. The difference is Penn State's at home, and they're an 8.5-point favorite currently. And what's interesting about this matchup here between the Nittany Lions and the Mustangs is the fact that these are two teams that have a lot of potential in my mind at a variety of positions, and yet they've been a few games from completely putting it together. Penn State losing to Ohio State at home by 7 could have been worse, but also could have been a closer game or a game in which Penn State pulls out a victory. They had opportunities to win. It wasn't a runaway Ohio State victory. Penn State versus Oregon, similar story. The only reason at one point it looked like Oregon might run away with it was because of Penn State's self-inflicted wounds. It could have been worse for Penn State, but it also could have been better. They lost to Oregon by 8 in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State, there's a universe where maybe they're 9-3 and in a bowl game instead of in the playoffs, but there's also a universe where they're 13-0 and the number 1 seed. For SMU, they're 11-2. They lost to 3 by BYU, and they lost to Clemson by 3 in the ACC championship game. And I think there is a universe where, yes, like that Duke game in overtime, SMU could be 9-3 going to a bowl game. There's also a world where they're 13-0 and they take the number 3 seed and they get that bye and they have a more secure position in the playoff. So that's what's interesting here. There's a lot of potential for these teams. I think especially for Penn State, as we will talk about in this video. Both of these teams also play Boise State in the following round. Now, Boise State's no cakewalk, but both of these teams, again, as we'll discuss, have great rushing defenses and they have a lot of talent. So the thought process, I think, should be take every team and every game seriously, especially if you're inside the locker room. There also has to be this awareness from an outsider perspective that the winner of this game should be heavily favored against Boise State. And perhaps you're looking at them like, how will they match up against Georgia or maybe Indiana or Notre Dame in the college football playoff semifinal in, I believe it's the Sugar Bowl. Correct me if I'm wrong. But let's talk about this and discuss what I think is a great matchup. It's taking place at noon Eastern time. It is 11 a.m. Central time for folks out in Texas, SMU fans. I think that what's important for both of these teams is for SMU making sure that you can move the football and making sure that you can replicate your success on offense. And for Penn State, you want to make sure that you're able to get pressure on Kevin Jennings, you're able to abuse that offensive line. And because your offense starts out slow, and same with your defense, typically, if your defense can start fast, if just one side of the ball can start fast in this game, and then both sides of the ball can come together as the game progresses, you're hoping that you can gain a leg up here on SMU and just really execute a snowball effect in your favor. And that's why I think for SMU, you have to find a way to get behind this Penn State secondary that is good, but that has had some moments of vulnerability here. Let's talk about these two units, the SMU offense and also the Penn State defense. Penn State's defense is highlighted by Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas, Abdul Carter on the D-line, Tony Roas, Kobe King at linebacker, Jalen Kimber, Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley, A.J. Harrison, Cam Miller at DB. For SMU on offense, wide receiver Moochie Dixon, Jordan Hudson, Jake Bailey, the offensive line of Savion Byrd, Logan Parr, Ja'Kai Clark, Justin Osborne, and P.J. Williams. At tight end, you got Matthew Hibner substituting in for the injured, done for the year R.J. Maryland, and we'll pray for his recovery. Quarterback's Kevin Jennings. Running back is, at this point, probably SMU legend Brashard Smith because he's taken them a long way this season, 1,000-yard running back. He is a factor in this game, don't get me wrong. But SMU has struggled to run the ball overall this season, and their passing attack is really what helps them on the offensive side of the football when you look at, rushing attack versus passing attack. Kevin Jennings, his wide receivers, the offensive line that's supposed to protect him, and his tight end. How do they do against, let's say, Abdul Carter, his fellow defensive lineman, and the Penn State defensive backfield? That's an intriguing matchup here. You look at SMU and their offense, they're scoring 33.6 points per game, 24th. 0.503 points per play. It's 15th. They're averaging 4.2 offensive touchdowns, or 4.1 offensive touchdowns per game. A correction there, 36.8 points per game, and 0.524 points per play for SMU's offense there. Got the wrong numbers, but we fixed it. You look at their yards per play, they're averaging 6.1 on the ground, and specifically in passing the football, they're averaging 8.6 yards per pass attempt, 13th, 13.4 yards per completion. Their QB sacked percentage is a 3.84%. So they do a pretty good job of protecting their quarterback. They're only rushing for 4.2 yards per carry right now, by the way SMU is. So they're better through the air than on the ground. How do they go up against a Penn State defense that this season is only allowing opponents to score 16.4 points per game, 0.26 points per play, only allowing opponents to average 4.5 yards per play? That's 8th. And then Penn State through the air, they're top 25 in opponent yards per pass attempt and opponent yards per completion. The Oregon game really brought those down. As I've mentioned before, though, Oregon has the best passing offense in the entire country, and I think the epitome of that is against Ohio State. They torched that secondary, and no one else has come close to having that level of success against Ohio State's secondary all season long. That's one of the critical matchups. Another one, I think, is SMU's defense, really their rushing defense, against Penn State's rushing offense. Let's check out those two units. For SMU on defense, you got Elijah Roberts, Anthony Booker Jr., Jared Harrison Hunte, and Jafari Harvey on the D-line. You have Ahmed Walker and Kobe Wilson at linebacker, and Brandon Crossley, Isaiah Nwokobia, Ahmad Moses, Jaylen Davis Robinson, and Cale Sanders Jr. That's their DB room. For Penn State on offense, Harrison Wallace III, Julian Fleming, and Liam Clifford, and also Amari Evans at wide receiver. Drew Shelton, Olaivavega Ioane, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, and Nolan Rucci. Tyler Warren at tight end, famous, top 10 in Heisman votes. And also, I think, the best tight end and one of the best players in all of college football. You have quarterback Drew Allar, but you also have to pay attention to quarterback Bo Pribula, Wildcat QB, and running backs Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen. Penn State this season is averaging on the ground 5.3 yards per carry and 202.2 rushing yards per game. They're also averaging 8.8 yards per pass attempt, which is 9th. And they're scoring 0.503 points per play. That's 15th. And they average 4.5 red zone scoring attempts per game. That's 10th. A large part of that success, though, on offense is because of their rushing attack and the fact that it is a non-negotiable, and their offensive line is pretty good as well. So might actually be even the best in the country after that performance against Oregon in the Big Ten Championship game, but that could also be a one-off. So I'm curious to see how Penn State's rushing attack does in this game against an SMU defense that has been wicked at times and lethal in stopping opposing ground games. SMU right now is only allowing opponents to average 2.8 yards per carry. That's 3rd. And in the air, they're getting 3.1 sacks per game, and they have a 7.72 sack percentage, and they're allowing less than 100 rushing yards per game as well. So this is a great defense, specifically up front for SMU. They get pressure. They challenge you at the lines of scrimmage. If SMU can shut down Penn State's rushing attack, and Penn State has to rely on those receivers and Drew Allar, this is going to be a game that has a chance of actually going in SMU's favor here, especially with the running back they have and also the offensive weapons that they have. They can score on this Penn State defense, and if SMU can really limit the bread and butter of Andy Kotelnicki's offense, the ground game, SMU might be able to take control, not just win, but take the reins, take control of this football game here. When you look at these offenses, I like SMU at wide receiver, and I also like them better than Penn State at offensive tackle. Penn State at wide receiver has been shaky this year. I think they're great at offensive tackle, but not quite at SMU's level. SMU quietly has one of the better offensive lines in the country. Not the best, but one of the better ones. They're also a push at center. I think both of these centers for these teams are rather impressive. For Penn State, that's Nick Dawkins, and for SMU, Ja'Kai Clark. Guard, I think, goes to Penn State. Tight end, running back, and quarterback also go to the Nittany Lions. Penn State, I think, has the better offense than SMU does, but it's closer than the, X Factor players and just the flashiness and Andy Korolnicki being a factor might suggest. Watch SMU, also look at the analytics, and you'll see that SMU's offense is a really good offense, a really potent offense, actually. I like Nicholas Singleton, Kaytron Allen, and also Tyler Warren. Drew Allar does not have the mobility that Kevin Jennings does, and Kevin Jennings is a really good quarterback, but he has some turnover problems, and Allar has been more secure with the football, and his upside, you have to factor that in along with Kevin Jennings' upside, and Allar does have a high upside. You look at defense here, and SMU actually has some areas where they're pretty good. Linebacker and safety specifically, they grade out incredibly high. Corner is actually a weakness for SMU. Penn State doesn't really have any clear weaknesses like SMU does, but they're not the nation's number one defense. I think the Oregon game has shown that. I think games against USC have showed that. It's one of the nation's better defenses. It might still be a top 5 defense. I think that Ohio State's, for example, is the nation's best, and Oregon could have scored close to 40 points on them. Let's say they make that 4th down conversion that they missed in the third quarter. They score 39 points. That's it. And that was against what I think is the nation's number 1 defense there. So I think Penn State's defense is still really, really good, but it's not a perfect unit. I mean, you don't have a 2021 Georgia defense. You don't have a 2022 or 2023 Iowa defense, or a 23 Michigan defense, or a 2011 Alabama defense, for example. You don't have that with either of these teams. SMU, I like them at safety. I think linebacker is an area where there can be competition. Penn State's Kobe King is pretty good, one of the nation's best linebackers, but Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker are also good and up there nationally. On the defensive line, I strongly prefer Penn State, and I think also at corner, especially with A.J. Harris, Penn State quietly has one of the better perimeter defense units nationally. Other important factors, you look at the trenches, I think that leans in Penn State's direction. Better O-line, better D-line. SMU's better on special teams, though, and it's not particularly close. Penn State, for much of this year, has been inconsistent. Pretty mediocre to bad at punting. Return game's been And the kicking game, bad earlier in the year. It's been pretty consistent, especially from short to medium range, but Ryan Barker does not have this all-powerful leg, and he's not the most accurate guy in the world. He's like, let's say, on a scale of Big Ten kickers, where you have Dominic Zavada, and in comparison, you have Jaden Fielding. He's closer to Jaden Fielding than Dominic Zavada, though not quite as inaccurate, but still closer on that spectrum. And roster-wise, in both recruiting talent, but also in what the eye test tells me, and how many players you have that are developed to produce at a high NFL level, and also executing at a collegiate level too. I'd like Penn State roster-wise. They're more talented recruiting-wise, but they also execute at a higher level. They're tougher, they're bigger, they're better developed. You look at what the power ratings say. FPI projects Penn State to win by 6.6 points. S&P Plus thinks Penn State wins by 5.5 points. My potential power index is about as high on Penn State over SMU as it is Texas over Clemson. So make from that what you will. It is an outlier here, has Penn State winning by 17.6 points. It's an interesting spot, with James Franklin. He's really struggled with winning big games. My power ratings do have they do have more factors than just roster. That's a hint for, coaching being a factor. And James Franklin, He definitely is not a top 10 head coach, and I think I've been pretty clear about that. Nonetheless, I do love Penn State's roster, the talent they have, and their assistant coaching. I also like what SMU has with their assistant coaches, and I do think their roster has an upside to it that perhaps has not been tapped into yet. This game should result in a Penn State victory per the power ratings. Mine is a bit higher on Penn State than others, and perhaps even lower on SMU, but I don't think so. It has SMU top 15, a borderline top 10, like most power ratings do. FPI is Penn State winning by 6.6, S&P Plus by 5.5, and my potential power ratings has Penn State winning by 17.6. You look at some other metrics here. SMU has a points per play margin of 0.23. They have an expected points added margin of 1.7. Penn State has a points per play margin of 0.244 and an EPA margin of 0.204. This is interesting as it shows that compared to points scored per play versus expected points scored per play, SMU's outperforming Penn State. SMU is more efficient given their field position, and I would actually say even given their talent in some respects, than the Nittany Lions are. Penn State's offense does a very good job. In fact, I would say they're the best in the country when it comes to moving in between the 20s. What's their problem, though? When they get into the red zone, they sometimes have to settle for more field goals than they would like. And they also oftentimes start out slow in the first quarter. SMU is a little bit more consistent on the offensive side than Penn State is. A little bit more balanced when it comes to execution by quarter. You look with Penn State right here, with their scoring offense per quarter, they are 66th in first quarter points per game, but then they're third in second quarter points per game, 33rd in third quarter points per game, and 41st in fourth quarter points per game. SMU is 9th and 14th in first and second quarter points per game, respectively, 64th in third quarter points per game, and 8th in fourth quarter points per game. A lot higher and more consistent across the board. Penn State, though, they're higher in points per play margin because, well, they do a better job than SMU does at stopping opposing offenses from scoring points and keeping them from getting inside the 20 and forcing some punts, forcing some turnovers. SMU's defense is outside of the top 100 in plays allowed per game. Their defense is used to being on the field for quite some time, and that can be a good thing, but also more likely than not that's suggesting that they struggle at getting stops, and that's not a good matchup when you look at Penn State and the offensive coordinator and the personnel that they have. Penn State's played the 30th best strength of schedule. SMU's played the 57th best. SMU's actually higher than Penn State in game control, 12th versus Penn State's 20th, and I think that has a lot to do with coaching. Penn State, when you look at it, has made some puzzling decisions in big games, many of them, and against some smaller opponents who they definitely outclass in talent and advanced metrics, they sometimes are slow or seemingly almost played down to their competition. Meanwhile, you look at efficiency, which is more points per player, expected points added based across the board, while game control is comparing schedules and predicting how different teams would do against different schedules. Penn State's 10th, and SMU is 13th. Coaching-wise, I like Rhett Lashlee better as a head coach than James Franklin, but I think that Penn State has the better offensive staff, the better defensive staff, and that they do a better job of developing their players currently than SMU does. So they have the better strength and conditioning staff. James Franklin, 1-14 against top 5 teams, 1-14. Huge losing record against top 10 teams as well, and not known to be a good game manager. I think he's done a great job of hiring assistant coaches and recruiting, but not at game managing, and that shows up in the biggest games. SMU's Rhett Lashlee, shorter career head coaching-wise, celebrated offensive coordinator at multiple different stops. He's done a very good job at SMU so far, and I'm curious to see how much does this game come down to individual decisions, or maybe if it doesn't, maybe one team, whether SMU or Penn State, snowballs the other. At the end of the day, I think SMU is going to put up a fight here, but my model has Penn State favored by 17.6 points. And while I think it's not going to be a blowout, I do think that at the end of the day, Penn State is eventually going to pull through and win by a comfortable scoring margin. I think it will be close for a half, maybe for 3/4, but eventually Penn State, with the second half adjustments that they make, with their superior talent, and more importantly than their superior talent, they do have some matchup edges. For example, SMU can potentially take away Penn State's rushing attack, although I don't anticipate that will happen. But if they do, Penn State has Tyler Warren and Harrison Wallace III, and I don't think that SMU's secondary and defense is good enough to lock down both of them like Ohio State did for much of the game. And if SMU is able to score in a certain way on Penn State's defense early, I don't think they have the talent or the coordination or the leadership, like all these different factors that Oregon is elite at. I don't think they have that. And eventually Penn State's defense will adjust and they'll take away what SMU is doing offensively. So I think Penn State covers, and I think they win by a score of 34-17. Again, Penn State being favored by 8.5 points here. I think they win. I think they cover 34-17, and they will play Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. That is who they will play. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kylo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.